Yeah. So first we have Jefferson Singh, President of University of California Student Association. Jefferson. Jefferson here? Okay, we'll be right back. So let's start with Charles Schwartz, Professor Emeritus, University of California, Berkeley. Hi, good afternoon, Professor.
Good afternoon. My name is Charles Schwartz. I've been on the faculty at UC Berkeley as a professor of physics since 1960. In my retirement, I've taken to studying the university's financial system, and I found a number of issues on which to criticize how our executives go about handling the public money that's entrusted to the Board of Regents. I'll talk today about the university's core funds. As described on page 25 of the last official budget approved by the Regents in November, these revenues, made up primarily of state appropriations and student tuition and fees, amount to $6 or $7 billion per year, or about 1/4 of UC's total operating budget. 3/4 of those core funds provide the salaries and benefits of the university faculty and their supporting staff, whose work is at the core of UC's mission. The paragraph I've just read to you is exactly the same as what Mr. Brostrom told you. Now I'm going to depart and say something very different. But as you know, the University of California has multiple missions, commonly described as teaching, research, and service. So one might ask how the core funds are spent across those individual missions. The UC establishment has never addressed that question. Indeed, they have assiduously avoided it. This is an important issue, not just at UC, but for all research universities. I have been invited here because I have done such an analysis for UC, disaggregating the costs of those several missions, and here are the results from my last detailed calculations, which I published about 2 years ago. It's in Table 1. Core funds for the year 2011-12. 22% of that went for undergraduate education, 37% went for unsponsored research related and related graduate programs, 17% for student financial aid, 12% for the health sciences, 7% for the other professional schools of business and law, and about 5% for sponsored research and public service. A more recent paper summarizing that calculation is posted on my website, and you can go and study it there. These percentage figures, which I just cited, can be translated into dollar amounts for this last fiscal year, and that's in Table 2. $1.45 billion for undergraduate education, $2.77 billion for research activity and related graduate academic programs, $1.25 billion for research and graduate programs in the professional schools, including the health sciences. And I note that if you take that $1.45 billion for undergraduate education and divide it by the number of undergraduate students, you come to an average per student cost of $7,500 per student. I'm sure you've never heard any number like that before. And I'm going to talk more about the implication of that later on. But first, I think you would want to understand how I come to these numbers. So let me try to explain some of that. I've attached a 10-page paper in which I give this explanation in this lecture in much more thorough detail. Here I'm summarizing it in 10 minutes. The phrase unsponsored research is probably unfamiliar to everybody, and I should explain what that means. Professors, like myself, are hired to work on all aspects of the university's missions and paid a salary covering all of that work throughout the academic year. Since UC is the state's primary institution for research, the research work of faculty is recognized as the most important component of their performance. Yet the established accounting system counts all of that academic year salary and benefits paid to professors as, quote, expenditures for instruction, unquote. There's a lot of research money that comes from external sources, that's what we call sponsored research, that is separately accounted as expenditures for research. But that money is not used to pay the professors during the academic year. Core funds pay for all of the professors' base salary, and that covers the work that I refer to as unsponsored research. Now, in the official accounting manuals and organizations that set up how universities should do their bookkeeping, they use the phrase departmental research for what I've called unsponsored research. But the phrase departmental research seems to make no sense. What are we doing? I'm in the Department of Physics and I'm researching the Department of Physics? No. What it means is it's research work that's paid for out of the department's budget. I think that's the origin of that phrase. The basic issue of cost accounting is to follow the flow of money, where it comes from, where it goes. Related to that is questions like, who should pay for this? Who should pay for that? So the work I'm trying to describe disaggregates the bundles that you heard from Mr. Brostrom that has been traditional, the way the university presents its cost structure, not just UC. This is done uniformly throughout the country. So if you take me seriously, you are walking a very revolutionary path, but I think it needs to be addressed. Now, the data shown in tables 1 and 2 are exactly the sort of information requested by the legislature, you, in Assembly Bill 94, which was signed into law July 1st, 2013, that asked UC to report the separated costs of, quote, undergraduate education, graduate academic education, graduate professional education, and research activities, unquote. Now, calculations of this type can never be done exactly, since there are overlaps. But I follow a fair and conventional methodology. It's called activity-based costing. Excuse me, sir, I believe you mentioned that phrase earlier and asking a question. Yeah, activity-based costing is the standard way to separate out the costs when you have a factory producing several products. You have people who work on all of them. You find out how much time they spend here, there, and the other, and you apportion the salaries accordingly. This is. Thank you, sir. You brought it up first. I didn't invent it, but it's so natural and it is customary. I'm a physicist. People in business and economics know this very well. I've never taken a course in it, but it just makes sense. And for that, you need data on how people spend their time. And it just so happens that the University of California did conduct a faculty time use survey a number of years ago. And I use that data. I got it out of the library, and I use it, and I'll tell you what it says. And then I also dig into a lot of the university's detailed accounting reports, dollars going here and there in different categories. And I've learned, it takes a while, I've learned how to parse those things. The calculations are always subject to quibbling. I'd love to get into that. I've asked university officials many times, let's get together and go over these things. They don't want any part of it. They have their traditional way of doing it, and they don't want to budge from that. That's what you saw on the report that was released by the president's office yesterday. They're sticking with that old bundling method. I'm going to show you a picture in a while that shows you that bundling. But let me tell you about the faculty time use survey. All university-related activities, 61.3 hours per week. This is the average work of professors like myself, full-time I&R faculty. The instructional activities are 42% of that, at 26 hours a week. Research creative activities, 23 hours a week, or 38%. University service, professional activities, and public service combined to about 20% of that. Then there's another interesting statistic from that old survey. It tells how professors apportion their class time. It turned out 50% for undergraduate classes, 50% for graduate. So the rough answer is how much of the faculty's, the professors, not the lecturers, the professors' work time can be allocated to undergraduate instruction. It would be 50% of 42%, or 21%. Now, that's not my final answer. There are some other things that one has to look at in the report. I'll add a little bit here, take away a little bit there, but it comes out to around that 21%. I'm sure that's a number that's never been acknowledged before by this university or other universities, but I think it's probably close to the truth. Now, some may worry that this is 30-year-old data, and it may not be reliable today. However, I've collected additional data that shows very little change in professors' teaching work over much of that period. And surprisingly, I found 2 reports from UC Office of the President where they cite this very same report from 30 years ago. They quote the same numbers I've just read to you, and they say that they believe it's accurate today. But they don't want to talk about it. So the preliminary report that the President's office issued in response to AB 94 that came out at the end of October, they said they're unable to disaggregate those costs, and they just gave you the big bundle again. Now, here's a picture that I've put together, a color picture on page 3 of my presentation that shows my disaggregation, those different percentages for these different components. I'll read them off. There's undergraduate education, 22% that came out purple. Then there's unsponsored research and graduate programs, that's the biggest, red, 37%. There's the student financial aid, which we understand, the health sciences portion, and then there's small amounts for research and for other professional schools. So I've made this disaggregation. This is not perfect. I'd love to work with people in the President's office so we could refine these numbers and get a sense of, well, it's 22% plus or minus 3%. You know, we can do that if we work together, but they don't want to touch it at all. Now, what I've shown on this graph as well is a big black arrow on the outside encompassing something like 70% of that whole. That's the bundle that they all put together, say we can't disaggregate it, but they present it with a title, Expenditure for Instruction. That's the way they do business. It's not very good. The most striking result in the tables that I read to you before is what it costs UC to provide undergraduate education, an average of $7,500 per student. We should compare that with the amount of mandatory tuition and fees that UC charges to resident undergraduates in California, which is $13,222. They're charging undergraduates almost twice what it actually costs them, according to my calculations, to provide undergraduate education. That doesn't sound right. I don't know how to make something like that get fixed, but I think it needs to be at least acknowledged and then figure out how to fix it. What we face here is not just a UC habit of bad accounting, but a long-standing disease that infects all the research universities in this country. And this grossly distorts any discussion about student tuition, which is a big thing. People talk about it, but nobody says the truth about what's going on. Now, for an ordinary 2-year college or a 4-year college, it doesn't matter. But for the research universities, where the research is a big driving part, a wonderful public good. I love the research work of the university. That's what I went there for. That's what I spent most of my time doing. If you don't acknowledge the cost of that, and you go about hiding that cost on the tuition bills of undergraduates, this is not right. And I think the challenge that I bring to you is what can be done about it. Now, in this longer paper that I've attached here, I end up with making a lot of serious policy proposals, which are unlike anything you've been discussing before. I'm not going to get into that now. I'd love to at some other time. The first thing you have to do, and this is what I say here, the first step must be to resolve the conflict, what I say about UC's cost structure and what the President's office says. You need to find out which one of us is to be believed. And I ask you to suggest how can we go about doing that. Thank you.
Yes. Mr. Chavez.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I actually work in this area and discussing activity-based costing. I'm sure a lot of the professors in your business schools are very aware of what we're trying to do here. I have to go to another meeting, but I just want to make this one really, 2 statements. If we go down this route and look at activity-based costing and cost drivers on those activities, we're going to be able to then to make good policy decisions. And that's what we want to do. I think that's where we're trying to go with this. The other thing is I'd like to highlight is that the universities aren't just a place where somebody comes out with a degree. The universities are the brain of the state. I mean, the innovation that comes out of there, the impact that it has within the region, When the Republican caucus was visiting Apple the other day, when they came out with their $800 billion, or $700 billion revenue that they're having, one of the things that came out really clearly is, and why you're here, is they say, because the innovation and people are here, and because your universities are here. The universities drive Silicon Valley. In my own district down in San Diego, the reason Biocom is there is because of the universities. So we're talking trillions of dollars of investment in new technology that's redefining the world that's coming out of the universities. So I'm not one of the people that are saying, we need to cut all the money out of the universities. As I talked to Ms. Napolitano last night, I'm one of the biggest supporters of the universities, and I understand they only educate 8-9% of the state population that's in colleges, but that's okay because they have another role, a very important role, so that people can actually have a job when they get out of school. But we have a role here, and I applaud the speaker on the looking at the budgeting aspect of it. But I just asked the previous panel to, especially LAO, we depend on you. You're like our honest broker. Define the terms. Define the terms. Tell us the process, and then so we're all saying the same thing, and then we can go forward and do that. And this is so important. That's why I'm excited about this process. It's going to go down quite a bit of time. And applaud it, sir. Sir, thank you very much for bringing this up. I'm going to go to your website and check out what you're writing about. I love this stuff. As you can tell, I love this stuff. Thank you.
A teacher loves to hear that.
Okay, thank you. I know you have to get going. Our next presenter, University of California Student Association, Jefferson, how do you pronounce it?
Kuch Sang.
Kuch Sang. Before he goes, I did want to, he's not a committee member, but I recognize Assemblymember Gallagher, who's a big interest in the University of California. Are you a UC alum?
No.
No, yes, he is back there. So he wants to make sure we spend the money wisely and expand access and affordability to the system. So thank you for being here today. Jefferson, go ahead.
Thank you to the chair, Assemblymember McCarthy, and members of the committee for inviting me to today's hearing. I am pleased to be here, and I appreciate each of you and your dedication to higher education, and I am eager to provide you with student perspective on the matters before you today. My name is Jefferson Kuch Sang, and I am the president of the UC Student Association, representing all undergraduate, graduate, and professional students in the UC system. I am also a fourth-year management and economics major at UC Merced. I will conclude my remarks today with a call for action for the members of the legislature. But first, I want to express concerns that students share over the state's disinvestment in education, issues and misguided priorities within the University of California, and finally, the so-called stability plan. We, the students that UCSA represents, like you, have concerns over the university's public accountability, transparency, and priorities. As you may have heard in last week's JLAC hearing, many legislators share our concerns on these same topics. I hope that today you will engage us all in a similar and healthy debate. This year, as the university and students seek a higher level of state reinvestment than in previous years, students want to ensure this money is being spent responsibly and in ways that will help students succeed. With the economic downturn, many state entities took a hit to their budgets. We believe that the UC bore a disproportionate share. As fees skyrocketed and the university scrambled to compensate for loss of state funds, students found their pockets emptied. This, of course, led to the loss of both quality and affordability. The UC began to shut out Californians and began to enroll higher-paying non-resident students. You have seen this picture painted before, the burden of the everyday student, debt that will stick with them for decades, dwindling support services on campuses, including mental health and basic food necessities, larger class sizes, and inadequate support for graduate students, now more than ever. All of these issues, each important and solvable in their own ways, have brought me here to advocate to you, to provide you the temperature of the student body, to hear our call for action. Which brings me to this year and the 2015-16 state budget. Governor Brown has laid out in his vision for our higher education systems, and we have appreciated some reinvestment. The legislature has unsuccessfully attempted to provide a higher level of funding last year to address some many critical needs. The question that students have this year is the same one that many of you have, made evident by today's hearing. The UC claiming that it needs significantly more funding is while it is continually demonstrating that it has everything it needs and more. This is concerning to students who now know that is not the reality. Priorities are important. If the UC is claiming it needs money, and students certainly see that in their daily lives that money is tight, then why does it appear from an outside perspective that the UC is doing so well? A priority of the UC has been increasing and creating salaries of top UC administrators, only adding to the campus bloat. Students see UC continually state that it needs higher funding just to maintain its competitiveness, critical services, and quality. The priority that the UC has is launching a global food initiative with the goal of learning how to feed the world of more than 7 billion people. What students see are classmates who are still starving. The priority that the UC has is a new $250 million venture capital fund, when students see less funding for graduate student support. I'm not saying that these are necessary investments and goals. I'm saying that this year, the UC has placed a massive tuition increase on the table, so it is our duty to ensure that these priorities are reevaluated. It should not be a surprise to anyone here that students do not like President Napolitano's long-term funding and stability plan. In fact, even the public sentiment swiftly rejected the proposal, while many of its supporters appear to be on the university's payroll. A plan that can increase undergraduate tuition up to 5%, contingent on state funds, over the next 5 years is inherently unpredictable to families and students. The UC website notes that, quote, "For nearly a century and a half, UC has thrived under independent governance. Designed to protect the university from shifting political winds, UC's constitutionally granted independence lets leadership put its health of the UC first," unquote. From our perspective, this plan does the opposite. The UC has placed itself at the center of a political fight by holding the students hostage before the legislature. With an approach like zero-based budgeting, we hope that the university can better outline its priorities and publicly talk with students about theirs. As promised, here is my call for action. Students want to see that public funds and student fees are being spent wisely and as democratically as possible. We all have a stake in ensuring that the state's reinvestment in higher education is spent wisely, and I urge you all to bring students to this table to help solve this problem. We all share the goal of working for a future where the UC remains the strongest public university system nationally and globally, while also adhering to its core tenets of affordability, accessibility, and quality. Thank you to the committee for holding today's hearing and all of the staff who have contributed to this work. I look forward with continuing these discussions. Thank you.